Okay, good afternoon. Today is October 6th. This is the meeting of the AI Advisory Council, and we are on the line with council members. Do council members feel like they want to go through intros or?
Completely up to you.
Yeah, let's just really super duper quick name, affiliation, and then pass it. And I'm just going to go down the list for ease because I don't really like the whole popcorn situation. So I'll go first. I'm Susanna Davis, Racial Equity Director for the state. I am a member of the working group. I'll send it to Josiah.
Hey, I'm Josiah. I'm the AI Director for the state.
All right, Michelle.
Michelle Anderson, Council to ADS.
Thank you. Chris.
Chris may be in listen only mode. He works for me, but I think he's just here to listen.
Okay. Mark.
Yep, I'm Mark Holmes. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the state and part of the original council or the work group and this council. So.
All right. I've got Chris Curtis. Are you also, actually, I'm going to tell you guys right now, I actually don't know who's on the working group. Sorry.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry to be late joining, and I am happy to appear on behalf of the Attorney General's office.
Thanks. James?
James is also one of my folks.
One day I will learn this. Amanda?
Hello, Amanda Jones. I work at the Department of Health, and I am the Health Informatics and Data Modernization Director.
All right. We have Matt. Matt, are you a guest here or a member of the working group? So sorry. You are on mute.
That's good because I'm just listening today. Thanks for calling me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Morrison.
Hi, I'm Jen Morrison. I'm the Commissioner of Public Safety, and I am on this council for sure. Right, Josiah?
You definitely are, and we are happy to have you. Jess?
Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. I'm Jess Vittner. I am the Legislative Director for the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and I have actually served in some capacity in the AI Council and Task Force since about 2019. So happy to still be here.
All right. Thank you all for your patience. I am just going to direct your attention to the chat. There is an agenda for today. It looks like it's 3 items. I'll put it back in case anyone did not see it the first time. And of course, there's also a link to our website if you want any past meeting minutes or other information about the working group. Before we get started with the items in the list, is there anything that anyone wants to share with the group in general? This is a public body, so if we have members of the public who'd like to address the group, then certainly please feel free to unmute and share your thoughts. Before we hear from the public, I do see Jess with a hand and then Josiah.
Yeah, I just wanted to let this group know and just for the public know that we just want to make sure that we're warning these meetings correctly and on the State of Libraries website. I can totally help with that from a council kind of standpoint, but just making sure that we're warning these meetings to the public in accordance with public meeting laws. So
thank you so much for that.
Something we're working on.
Yeah, really appreciate that. We may take you up on that offer, so thank you very much.
No problem. I have a ton of experience scheduling these things, so yeah.
Josiah?
Yeah, I think general updates from my group. There's been a lot of churn in the well, I guess interest across many states about AI. So I've been working with notably Maryland over the last couple weeks, as well as the National Governors Association, kind of highlighting the good work this council has done and some of the operational stuff we've been doing as well. And this weekend, I'm going to NASCIO along with Mark, and I'll be presenting on AI there as well. And Susanna, I do have a deck once we finish the opening comments.
You have a deck, you said?
Yeah, I have a slide deck to facilitate the other items.
Perfect. Okay, great.
Just add a little bit for clarity. The NASCIO conference that Josiah was mentioning is the National Association of State CIOs. So we'll be in Minneapolis with CIOs and other tech leadership from all the other states across the country. So, and this will be a topic that we'll be kind of sharing some ideas. As Josiah's had a lot of outreach, is very much seen as sort of an early swimmer in the pond, as we'll call it.
All right. That's very exciting. Thank you. We're going to look forward to a report back on that.
Yep.
I'll renew our call if there is any comment from the public. We're also going to make an attempt to put some more space at the end of today's meeting, just in case anyone who's not a working group member would like to address the group regarding anything that we talk about later today. If we have something now, we'd love to hear it. And if not, you know where to find us. So we'll be watching the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to send it over to Josiah so that he can move with the first part of today's presentation.
All right. Thank you, Susanna. Going to attempt to screen share. Let me know when this comes through for y'all.
We can see.
Okay, great. So as Susanna said, agenda items, and I already talked about that. So diving right into generative AI, one of the topics that we discussed last time was how to use generative AI well. And one of the recommendations that came out of that was to have some standard language that people could use to say, hey, I use generative AI in these ways, and here's how I used it appropriately and safely, and made sure that it represented what I wanted it to say. So on the ADS side, I took that back, and we've come up with these two proposals for language. And I'm going to jump ahead just for a minute to frame the conversation, then come back here. Last time I presented, it was kind of an area plot with like shapes of when do you need to cite, when is it not acceptable use, when is it, just check with your boss and it's okay to use generative AI in your work. And so based on some feedback that I received then, kind of structured that into more of a table, which I think is a bit more approachable. So just as a refresher, we're thinking about citing things kind of in this middle area where AI is either being used a bit more deeply or the content is being distributed a bit more widely. So we're not suggesting that you would need to like say, I use generative AI if you were using it for a grammar check, for example. But if it was some sort of public facing content and you were using it in the drafting or production of that content, this is where we're thinking that it would be appropriate to say, I use generative AI, here's the one that I used, and here's how I used it. So with that background, here are some language proposals, and I'll read them off, and then I'd like to start with the one on the left and just have some discussion about these, and I'll edit them in real time here, and we can hopefully get consensus on what these should look like. So this content was, and then however you used it, either drafted, edited, translated, with the assistance of a generative artificial intelligence, and then which one you used. I put 3 here. There are obviously others. The content has been reviewed and verified to be accurate and complete and represents the intent of, and then whoever basically you're using it on behalf of, either an office, person's name, a department, or the state as a whole. So I'll start with that one. The idea again is that at the bottom of the content, almost like a citation, this would be included. So yeah, thoughts or feedback so far from the council members?
I think clarity being a primary goal, this is excellent. I mean, Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I know there wasn't much, but I'm just saying, I think it was excellent.
Anyone got any feedback or any improvements, or this looks pretty good, and we'll include it in our interim guidance for employees to start using.
Can you, I'm sorry if you mentioned this already, can you say where that interim guidance would be found? If I'm a sort of average employee, how would I know where to find this?
That's a great question. So I think our intention is that ADS will issue this as guidance on how to use generative AI, and we would push it out. The way we usually push those out, which is a couple of things. I think often it goes out in through the HR newsletter, and then it gets promulgated on our internal teams. And we also use the IT leaders in each agency to disseminate this at the higher levels of the organization. That is something we're actively working on doing better, but I think those are the primary approaches we've used in the past to putting out guidance like this.
Okay, thanks a lot. I would say, just as a suggestion, I know that the governor's office, Rebecca, who is the governor's comms director, coordinates a group of statewide employees who are communications leads in their various agencies. So that would be a good place to share this out as well. And then possibly, I know Kendall in the governor's office also coordinates a statewide group of anyone who's a policy lead. And that may also be another good venue just to make sure that we saturate for awareness.
Thank you. Great idea.
I want to second what Susanna says, because oftentimes we don't always get stuff that's pushed out. So just because I feel like our group would definitely use it, I know, for source code writing. So I want to make sure that VDH staff get it too.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I'm not hearing any changes, so I'm going to jump over to the emergency translation template, which is we intend for this to be used in cases like in the immediate aftermath of the flood that we had recently, or I'm thinking of sometimes during COVID, where we needed to put out language to people who were not who didn't speak English as their first language. We need to get information distributed broadly to them very quickly, and the need to distribute information was moving faster than our ability to use the translation services that we have available. So the idea is that we use language like this. This content was translated with the assistance of a generative artificial intelligence, and then whichever one it was. Right now we have kind of two that are used within the state, Google Translate, and then one from Microsoft, from Azure. This content has not yet been reviewed and verified, but will be by a date kind of at most 24 hours away. The intention is that we do want to get this stuff reviewed and verified very quickly. This notice will be updated once the review is complete. For any questions about this content or to report confusing or conflicting text, please contact, and then whoever the contact is. The idea is after this was, after that expiration date and it's been reviewed, the language would switch over to this one, saying that it was translated with the assistance of, and then whichever one of these you used, and it was reviewed and verified. So there's two pieces here. One is like the language itself, and then the other is the embedded recommendation or requirement that things have to be reviewed within 24 hours. If you use a robot to do the translation, you need a professional translator basically to review that content within 24 hours. Susanna, I know you and I spoke about this one a little bit as we were kind of forming this as a potential recommendation. Did you want to talk a little bit about the state of machine translation right now in your experience?
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, it seems like we end up saying this at the beginning, middle, and end of every AI council meeting, but obviously things are moving super fast when it comes to AI technologies. And so there are certainly small improvements that we're seeing day by day, but for the most part, there's still a very high risk of error when it comes to machine generated translations between languages, especially if you're going from language A to B to C. So we still do very strongly recommend that if you do need something important translated, that you notify as early as possible that you reach out to one of the providers in the state to get it done by a person. But we recognize that sometimes something happens in an absolute flash and you really have to get something out. This is definitely a plan B or C. This is not a plan A. So again, one of the most important pieces is that all of the agencies and departments have publicly posted a notice that says if you need something translated, that can be provided free of cost to you. I think this is a tangent. This is not the direct question you asked me. Notice of the availability of translation is important. And then in terms of emergency translations, again, I mean, just during the flood, I remember you put together that translator website really fast, and I tested it using the only non-English language that I could test it in, and it looked good. But that's also a really easy language, and I worry about some of the other ones we have in Vermont that are not Spanish, that every third person in the world speaks it. So that being said, again, I would just be really cautious about using the technology itself. But when we do, caution statements, notifications like these are going to be really, really important. And again, that 24-hour piece is really critical because I think sometimes we'll just put out the statement and just kind of walk away and say we've done our part. But if you're not having it checked by a person, then we really could be putting out information that's inaccurate and that could lead to harm. So the follow-up is going to be what's really important there too.
Thank you.
I'm seeing two hands, but I don't know if they're for me or for you, Josiah.
I can't see who they are, so why don't you call on them and we'll find out.
I see Jess.
Yeah, so I had a question about the what we are qualifying as generative artificial intelligence. If it's just these two examples are kind of broader than that. The agency ran into a situation that I helped spearhead where we wanted to closed caption translate our emergency assistance program webinars, and we utilized essentially like a function on YouTube to help us do that. And actually through Microsoft Teams. So I guess I should say first the script was created in Microsoft Teams, and then we utilized YouTube to help us actually produce the videos with the closed captioning. And so I'm just wondering if we, like as we think about, what those examples of artificial intelligence are, just making sure that, we're all on the same page of like how far it goes, I guess. Because if so, then I would have had to add this to our YouTube channel and all of the videos that we produced, and not just like written documents. So
yeah, that's a great point. I would say at this stage, basically any machine translation that you're going to be using is going to be using generative AI.
okay.
And I think this isn't a bad, like this wouldn't be a bad disclaimer to put on, even if you didn't know for sure that it was AI, and maybe adding the word AI there does not particularly strengthen this. But yeah, I would see that this probably should be added. It does make it an interesting point about reviewing the content of the closed captioning and whether we intend that we need to have content like that reviewed. Susanna, do you have thoughts on that?
Do you mean reviewing the content of the captions in English for substantive accuracy? I'm sorry.
I think both, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
that one we probably should do because that was using, you should probably do that. But then the translations of those captions to other languages using YouTube, for example.
Especially for like spoken accuracy.
Yeah, I do think that it should definitely be both. The easiest way to do it is before we do before we do auto generated translation, do the English corrections. I find that I especially have to do that because
Okay.
they'll never know how to spell my name correctly in captions or a lot of the words that we use. So so it's good to do that. Just it's kind of like the garbage in, garbage out. So you just want it to be as clean as possible on the front end, and then afterwards the translations will be a lot easier. And then yeah, if we are using captions that are then auto translated, it would be a real best practice to have that checked by a person. And that's part of the reason that you know, if you have a sense of what your script is going to be ahead of time, maybe even ahead of the presentation, you can go ahead and forward that to one of the translation providers and let them get started on it. The tricky thing comes when you have more impromptu or in the moment conversations. Like let's say you do have a script, but then you also have a Q&A that's live.
Yeah.
That may be something that you can't anticipate. And so you may not be able to do that on the front end. And that's where maybe an auto-generated may be able to come in handy. So it's tricky, and the timelines are what you want to think about because you want to give lead time to any external people who are going to be assisting. And in terms of ASL, because I know, well, is that part of this conversation? I guess not, is it?
We've been talking about generative, which is mostly text right now. I think that's an interesting pin because we do have video generation kind of landing as we speak, but I haven't seen anyone use it to generate ASL yet.
Okay, so maybe we put a pin in that because whenever we talk about translation, we're always including ASL in the picture. And I imagine that, and that's considered a distinct language from English. So I am, that may come up on this council's radar in the future.
Yeah, I think it is reasonable to say we're currently scoping this to text. We're currently scoping this to text.
Yeah.
That said, probably next year we'll be back having this conversation about spoken and probably video too.
Also see Jen Morrison with a hand.
Hi, with my hand. I agree that 24 hours is desirable, but in a true emergency, and the flooding is an example, but it's not at all the only example. I mean, I'm thinking a mass shooting or something extremely chaotic and ongoing. 24 hours just is probably not achievable, and we haven't even called it 24 business hours. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can try and get something translated, but if we're calling them on Saturday morning at 3 a.m, it could be Monday afternoon before we get a service that will verify it. So I don't know how locked in we want to be to a 24-hour window. And I just thought I'd drop that comment that it sounds like an admirable goal. But if you were if it was going to require me to take someone off of what they were doing in their emergency response over the 3 days of flooding, I would have said, no, that's not the highest and best use of our time.
Definitely hear that. There's gonna be a few factors that play into it. So for us to be in compliance with the federal laws, one of the things that is part of the 4-factor test is what are the language groups that the agency in question most commonly interacts with, because those are the ones that you're going to want to prioritize. So it might be the case that if you are that if your agency or department tends to interact with language groups that have languages that are super easy and common to access, then the 24 hours may be very achievable. For example, I can think of 3 of the providers we use for interpreters and translators. All of them do Arabic, for example. So we could pull from any of the state's contracts with any of those 3 to find someone with immediate availability to do it right away. And also, I think if we're having them check existing text as opposed to doing a fresh translation from their own brain, then I think that also can add to the speed of the process as well. Definitely hearing you on the difference between business hours and clock hours, calendar hours. And I mean, I don't, the difficult thing is that every emergency is very unique and case specific. And so it's really hard to generate cookie cutter protocols that'll fit all of them. So yeah, I'm not giving a declarative answer to your statement, but I definitely hear it and hear the complication in it.
Would we be comfortable saying 72 hours and making it clear that that's clock hours, and unless it's a holiday, then we have a day and a business day in there? Or?
I don't see a holiday as a good enough reason that
Right.
some people in the state can't have like emergency info, you know?
Yeah, that's fair.
I think,
Is
I
it-
think, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, is it possible just to say, at first, like at this iteration, as soon as possible with the communicated goal to be 24 hours? Because I'm thinking, like, if we have, if agencies and departments are going to adapt to this 24-hour timeline and just this policy in general, it could take some time. But if we, framed it as, but will be verified, as soon as possible, and then direct agencies to, our goal is within this 24-hour window, understanding that it's going to take some adapting for everyone to, create policies around how to execute that 24 hours. Just thinking about, the from a like internal policy perspective, sometimes just speaking from the agency of commerce, I feel like sometimes it's, one department is a lot better at and is a lot better at responding sometimes to translation needs than others, just because that they do it more frequently. But it would allow us to kind of develop a blanket policy, and a goal to reach with that 24-hour mark.
Yeah, I
Maybe-
like that. I think that that's good. I think that communicated goal should be internally and externally. We should just hold ourselves to it publicly and say, not been reviewed and verified, but will be as soon as possible, with a goal of 24 hours or whatever's the cleanest way to say that. But I agree with the suggestion. And also I know it's difficult to visualize now, but part of the rollout of the statewide language access plan is that there will be designated people whose job it is to coordinate this kind of thing. And so right now it kind of feels like we're just finding whoever's available and making do with the best that we have. But it is our intention that we are standing up something where we'll know exactly who to go to, and those people will know that they're on it when something happens. So to the extent that that adds any comfort, I just will say that.
Well, it does, because if our job is to handhold through a process and ensure an outcome within a certain timeline, that's another task on an already overtasked portion of the enterprise. But if we can say, this is the information that needs to get out, these are the languages that we know it needs to go out in, and we pass the task off and somebody else does it, that's fine. That works great. It's the having to assign someone to see it through and repost it and make it somehow verify that the translation was correct, that feels like that's not our wheelhouse. And I love hearing that there's going to be a resource for us to turn to consistently. That'll definitely streamline things.
Yeah, and I mean that yes, and some of those point people are going to be embedded in the departments and agencies as well. So it's not going to be fully outsourced to somebody outside of whatever team is working on it. I will also say one more thing that I really can't wait for, which is some text we reuse all the time. And so there's nothing that stops us from building up a body of pre-written stuff, right? Like, oh, for flood situations, here's 12 individual unique paragraphs that we may be saying to people, and they're just in the languages, and we can always just grab them and throw them together. Simple stuff like stay away from waterways, don't wear swimmies in Otter Creek or whatever. So to some limited extent, we also can do like one round of translation of really common emergency communications and copy paste when we need to. And then obviously the really nuanced case specific stuff will be much less of a lift in the moment.
Okay. And Susanna, you mentioned the tool that we put together at the beginning of the flood, at the beginning of this conversation. I think we can just put this language into that tool, so it's just always at the end in all the languages whenever somebody uses the tool. That block is just there. So
yeah,
I think that'll be pretty easy. Okay, I'm feeling pretty like I know what to do with this. If there's any other discussion, we can continue, or I can jump over to the next thing. Okay. So pivoting slightly, now that we have the language that says we whatever the options are, drafted, edited, translated, our text using generative AI, I wanted to get a little bit more feedback on this, and I think we have time to dive into this a little bit. I think we're not going to get through everything else on the agenda we wanted to, but if people have thoughts on where we put these lines, I did adjust things a little bit based on our previous conversation, and I know Susanna, you had some an analyst on your team who provided a little bit of feedback on this as well. If you wanted to summarize any of that for the group, that'd be great.
It was kind of a lot.
It was.
I'm gonna wait to see what other people say first.
Okay.
I could also just share that memo with the group and just let people review it at their leisure, unless we want to make a decision point on it right now.
No, I don't think we need a decision on this right now. I would like one in the next session, but I did want to have any other discussion or guidance I wanted to get now before we submit a final version of this to the group for next time. Amanda, I know you had mentioned code. That's also close to my heart, using generative AI to generate source code. The way that I'm looking at it, the way that we've been thinking about it and what's reflected here is if you use it to like rough in the structure of your code or brainstorm an approach, that's fine. If you use it to actually like write chunks of your code, that would be collaborative writing, and you would cite it, and a human would say, yeah, I reviewed that and made sure that it like was good. And I kind of, in this case, collaborative writing, right? It's that it's writing some of it, you're writing some of it, you're really kind of using it as a pair programmer almost. The human edited, where like you've got a generative AI generating large blocks of, say, source code, and then like a person just like looking at it and making sure it looks okay. That's something that I don't feel like is appropriate right now for A, because you're running code that you don't necessarily like, and it hasn't necessarily been well reviewed, and B, because there's the possibility that there's stuff in there that you weren't intending, or that there's assumptions made that you weren't expecting. I think Jay's comments that Susanna will circulate after this mentioned that, algorithmic bias and stuff leaking in through that type of an approach. So that's kind of just to take one example, right, of how this is read and how it would work. Interested in your thoughts on it, or if you want to dive into any of these others, we can.
I think that's makes perfect sense. I think a lot of what people would be using it for is they're writing and they're making sure they're going in the right direction, and then they test it out and go back and they test it out. So it's very human centered with just a little assistance. I think if the goal is eventually to have a sort of table that ends up being public, I would just define human edited and make like definitions of some of these to be very clear, just because it's not, I would say, accessible and understandable to maybe a more general audience.
Okay, great point. Any other thoughts or feedback on this? Would anybody draw any of these lines in a different spot than I have them?
I don't know if I know enough about AI to know, like in a press release or a prepared remark, I don't know what collaborative writing means. You mean you collaborate with an AI thing, with a chat bot?
Yeah, I think I'm saying that would not be acceptable, right? It would be okay to have the chatbot do the kind of rough draft of the types of things you're going to say, but if you use it kind of beyond that or use large chunks of that language, I feel like that is what becomes not really acceptable. At least from
What
my
does
perspective.
human edited mean?
Human
what
edited is like, okay, yeah, so this is good. So I guess these three are the ones that are squishiest, right? The first draft, collaborative writing, human edited. First draft, I see like you're just like prompt, I want to do a talk about this, and then you see what types of things it comes up with. And like how it structures the language in the flow. Collaborative writing is more kind of a multi back and forth, like, oh, I didn't like that, say this another way. And then like using a good chunk of the words that it's providing like become part of the final document. And then the human edited is like you just take the content that it provided and review it and like change a few things. I guess you could almost look at them as like the percentage of it that's written by the robot.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I'll work on getting good definitions for these things across the top. Susanna will circulate the feedback from Jay on her team, and we can kind of come up with a final version of this for next time. All right. So I know we wanted to leave some time for public comment at the end. Susanna, do you want to go on to the next agenda item or pivot to that?
No, let's let it ride. Keep going.
Okay. So next item I wanted to talk through was some of these. We went over these last time, I think. So for our 2024 report, I'm not going to read to you all of this, but just wanted to refresh your memory that we're really looking at use and data management policies. So this is really the operational side of AI implementations. We provided the code of ethics, which talked about the high-level guiding principles and how we were going to approach using AI. This is getting into like operationalizing this. So some of this is who deploys it. Some of this is notice. Some of this is explainability. We've covered some of these topics in our code of ethics. I'm just going to kind of page through these so you can remember what's in this. These are considerations that legislature has asked us to have as we're thinking about what does notice look like. And some of these are reflected in the pro forma declarations we reviewed for generative AI usage. So there's those, and then there's explaining the basis for a decision, basically explainability, making sure that it's understandable how systems work. So those are the kind of three big topics for the report. Much like when we approach the code of ethics, there are people who have been thinking about this prior to us. This is ATARC, which has an AI policy framework that's drawn from federal sources. We use their work heavily in the first half of this when we were developing the code of ethics. So there's this operations side. We used the ethics side pretty heavily before. This is their operations side. So I think this dovetails nicely with the ask from legislature, and I think we could address any of these topics that we think are worth addressing as we're developing our report for this year. So they specifically the methodology that's used to develop them, how they're going to be tested. I think that this is one that we should probably comment on. Diversity in this is kind of a workforce consideration, but I think at least they phrased it here, but I think it is also relevant to the testing and review of the system. Data management is called out by legislature. This kind of fills it in with a little bit more detail. UX is user experience design. So this is about how state staff are going to use the AI in their work. Security considerations, I won't read all of these, but these are all like things that we might want to consider as we're drafting or as we're putting together that report and our recommendation for operations. I also recognize that the division is kind of more responsible for operations, and that operations are tied a little bit more closely to the particulars of the technology, right, and the technological moment that we're in. So the code of ethics, I expect, will continue to update and review, but that's going to be, I think, a bit more stable overall in its like detail. The operations, I think, is going to evolve a bit more rapidly, and so I think some guiding principles about how we operationalize AI are useful. We've got some of those in the code of ethics already. I think we can draw on a few of these to provide more. And then working through the details of what does notice look like and what does explainability look like. And I think that's how I'm, based on the reading and the conversation we've had previously, that's how I'm thinking that we'll approach this year's deliverable. I guess my question for the group is validation that yes, that approach makes sense. And then also if there are specific ones of these that you think are worth including in our recommendation to legislature, and all of them is fine, but I'm hoping maybe it's a bit less than all of them, so that my team can start working on them and putting drafts together about how we would operationalize some of these. And Jen, I see you have your hand up, so go for it.
So this is a lot, is my first feedback. So maybe this group should be prioritizing which pieces of this we want to advance this year, or even when drafting whatever document we're preparing for the legislature, that we have a 3-year tiered approach to this. I'm sure there's some pieces of the state enterprise that this, maybe it's already in use or maybe it's not at all new. This is another planet to most of my people. So we have to acknowledge that across the state enterprise, there's just going to be this mass chasm of users and non-users, native speakers of AI, or at least interfacers with AI, and people who think that's a bridge too far. So yeah, I think maybe we should tier them or prioritize them and work on, for instance, the workforce piece. Seems like that in and of itself is a big lift.
Great point. Any others that you would put kind of on the top of the stack, just from a look at this?
I mean, obviously, safety and security, system security is not letting the AI do it, become a power for evil instead of good. And the diversity piece at the startup, at the very beginning, we have to make sure that we're doing that. So, I mean, that's at a quick glance, those 3, but I'm sure there's more if we really got into a ranking situation.
Okay, thank you.
I would even say methodology, like that, I guess might, for me, be one of the first ones, or at least like the umbrella that kind of all of these fall through.
Mark?
I was going to suggest that maybe we let me take my hand down, take a session and actually talk about the ATARC model in general, right? Because it is a good model, but it's also a maturity model as well. So you adopt it in sort of a paced approach as well. And so maybe I think because it's going to be really, I agree with you that it's going to be the underpinnings of a lot of, federal, other state agency policy and procedure and things like that. Maybe we just take a step and just kind of talk about the ATARC model first and really drill in, because like its top tier is really defining like the four principles of accountability, transparency. I don't remember the other two off the top of my head, but my point is like talk about that, and as it drills down to these, and it shows the maturity model. So then that gives us some guidance, I think, to the kinds of things that the commissioner was just speaking of, like, okay, what sort of order do we take in prioritization in these things? So.
Okay. Thank you. That's a good thought. We can certainly do that next time, I think, as long as I guess you're one of the co-chairs. So as long as the other co-chair is amenable to that approach, that works for me.
Yeah, and we can send out some homework for folks to, read up on it beforehand. So.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
And I also agree with Jen's thought about potentially proposing something that takes multiple, like a phased approach. I do think that if we end up having a lot of things that we want to recommend to the legislature, I think there's a difference between saying this is the full universe of stuff we like that we should do right now versus this is the full universe of stuff that we like and here's what we think should happen first, second, and third. So I think that it's worth mentioning all of it at the outset, but just approach it in a phased
Right.
way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we all see this as a rapidly evolving landscape, and so it's important for us to kind of be real clear as to like where are we right now in that landscape? What are we looking at, but what are we doing? Versus there's a lot of different avenues and concerns that could really kind of come into it, and as long as we're methodological in our approach, I think that's the most comforting part.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is one of the reports that state government gets that a lot of it's going to be stale a few months after it's submitted, and I guess we just have to make peace with that.
Yeah, we even saw that in like the initial recommendation, right? We spent almost a year and a half gathering recommendations about the council, and then by the time we delivered it, we're like, well.
I think the phased approach makes a lot of sense, and I'll say that the operational guidance that my group needs is really based on what's the state of the current technology and what are the use cases in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at this point, as we are looking at AI more from a task-based approach, right, we're using it to automate specific tasks or to give people like state employees the ability to approach certain tasks more efficiently. I think that does, that we don't need detail on all of these right away because we're not looking at robots to do end-to-end processes. We're really looking at it from a task perspective. So I'll work with my team and think about priority of the use cases, priority of these items based on the use cases that are on the horizon right now. And we'll come back with that from our perspective too.
Hey, Josiah, as your team noodles with that, I'm clearly one of the least tech people on this council, but I promise you in any committee room that we present in, I will look like a tech genius. So we probably need to say, and when we talk about this, we're talking about applications of artificial intelligence, such as the tax department employing a phone tree to allow people to get to the right person more efficiently, or I like we have to give them ideas of what we're talking about, or else people's minds go a lot of places.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure that we have time for the public comment part. So I guess, Susanna, I'll turn it back over to you and I'll stop sharing and we can pivot to that.
Great. All right. Anyone on the line who's not a member of the working group and you've just got something you got to say before we close, please feel free to unmute and let us know. If you're on the phone, I don't think we have any phone people, but if you're on the phone, I think it's *6 to unmute. And if you'd rather type out your comments, we are watching the chat. All right. So I don't think we have any spoken comments, and I don't see anyone typing in the chat. If you are typing, we will end up seeing it. But for now, we'll just assume that we don't have comments. So I think that is it. Is there anything else that must be said that has not been said? All right. Yesterday, I was on a call and the person ended early and she said, I'm going to put some time confetti on your calendar. So you've got 4 minutes of time confetti. Don't spend it all in one place.
Very much.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.